Morning, we are in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, chapter 475, Halacha 4. We're learning this now because we learned in our Gemara the law that there should be broken matzah. And one of the translations of the word lechem, one of the translations of the word which describes matzah in the verse lechem meaning bread, and oini is that word that the Gemara gives a few translations to. Your Halacha 4.
This is 75 or 75.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here, it's chapter 475, see?
I'll go.
And one of the translations of the word oini is poor man, poor man's bread. And the Gemara tells us poor man's bread means that you don't eat from a whole loaf, you eat from a piece, from broken. We discussed last time we learned, so that would be Friday, that there's a dispute as to this instruction that the matzah be broken. Is that in addition to having two whole matzahs? Is every Yom Tov a person supposed to have two whole breads, the Lechem Mishnah? And Rashbam learned, therefore, when the Gemara says you have to have poor man's bread on Pesach, that means in addition to the two whole ones, the Lechem Mishnah, which is what we do. We have three matzahs, two remain whole, Lechem Mishnah, and we have one broken. Rambam says no. When the Gemara says poor man's bread, it actually means in lieu of the Lechem Mishnah, which means no two whole loaves, 1.5 loaves. That was a dispute we learned last week. We also learned another dispute as to when are we required to have that broken matzah. Rambam writes the matzah is to be broken just before you make the bracha. But the point is that you eat and make a bracha on a broken bread instead of the Lechem Mishnah. So you would do yachatz in Rambam's view, yachatz meaning breaking the middle matzah. You would do it after rachz, after you washed your hands for bread. After you finish reciting the whole Haggadah, wash your hands for bread, break the matzah, no middle one, but just break one. Then he says, take the half, wrap it into the whole. So that way it looks like you're making a bracha on a whole, but inside there's the half broken one. Make hamotzi, make your bracha, and eat. Rashbam, Alter Rebbe explained for us that when the Gemara says you have to recite the Haggadah over matzah, you have to recite the Haggadah over the kind of matzah that you will fulfill your obligation of. And because your obligation is to have a broken matzah, therefore you're required to have a broken matzah as you recite the whole Haggadah. That's our custom. We do yachatz, we break the middle matzah before we start the Haggadah. Yeah, this is what we learned so far. Now let's see halacha dalet. So we concluded that our custom is to have 3 matzahs. 2 are for the Lechem Mishnah to have a whole one. 1 is because the Torah says to have a broken matzah, to have a poor man's bread. And we already said that you put the broken one in between the 2 whole. Right? So the middle one's broken. So dalet. So if it's sort of shtei yochas, one is required to hold shtei hashlemas, the 2 whole matzahs, the bottom and the top one, biyadai in his hand, the shas birchas hamotzi at the time of his reciting the word the bracha hamotzi. Yeah. So he's saying the bracha hamotzi on the 2 whole loaves because he has to make lechem mishnah. That's the point. That prusa and the piece of matzah, the broken piece, tiyah ben shtei hashlemas, should be between the 2 whole loaves, between the 2 whole matzahs. One should not have the broken one on top, meaning don't break the top matzah and have 2 whole ones under. Why not? Because one is first required to do hamotzi, and then only afterwards the bracha of matzah, the bracha of the mitzvah. This is always the case, right? When we make kiddush on Friday night, we make first hagafim. We learned this a while back. It's machlekes, which one you should do first, Beishamai and Basilil, whether you should do the bracha of wine first and then afterwards the bracha of Shabbos, or the other way around. We of course make the bracha of wine first. Right? Yom HaShishi is a preamble. Right? We learned this way back when. Then you make hagafen, and then you make the bracha on Shabbos. So likewise here, you're making the bracha on the bread, hamotzi, and then you make the bracha on the mitzvah, lachilas matzah. Now, considering that hamotzi comes first, birchas hamotzi ala shlema, the bracha of Hamaitzi always is, at least in the first instance, should be recited over a whole loaf. So if you're eating a bagel for lunch, better make the bracha on the whole bagel and then cut it. That's unless doing so would cause a major break between your bracha and your eating, right? This is the reason. Just parenthetically, you make lechem mishnah on regular Shabbos. You're making the bracha on a whole loaf, 2 whole loaves actually, right? Because lechem mishnah. And before you do that, you make a score, right? Why do you do that? Because the halacha is you're supposed to cut the part of the bread that's the best part of the bread. Now, if you make hamaitzi and then you start looking for the best part of the bread, you're making an interruption. So look for the best part of the bread before you make the bracha. Score it so you know which area is the best part. Make hamaitzi, and then you know where to cut right away. So it delays. What's the word? It avoids any extra unnecessary delay. That's the halacha. Why we score.
Yeah.
Today's become like a thing, but
yeah, exactly.
You're supposed to actually look.
Right.
Where's the nicest part?
Exactly.
Score where you want to cut. That's the idea.
Nobody analyzes it. It's just like whatever.
We just follow what the instructions say. But if you learn the background, right?
Right.
Okay. So the point, therefore, is you're supposed to make a bracha hamaitzi on a whole loaf, and therefore do not put the broken one on top. Because that would look like you're making the bracha on a broken matzah. You're supposed to make a bracha on a whole matzah, so that's got to be your top one. But then ubirchas ala chilas matzah. But the bracha thanking Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah is not on the whole matzah. He ala prusah on the broken matzah. She lechamoni, which is the poor man's bread. That's what you're supposed to make. That's what you're supposed to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on. Ve'ima prusa tiyul malamayla. And therefore, if the broken one will be on top, yitzarech laver ala mitzvahs. You'll have to pass over a requirement because shivarach hamaitzi b'tchil when you make hamaitzi first. So let's like this.
Use
Like a
piece of paper.
yeah.
Great.
One piece of paper, one paper. Yeah. So let's imagine. Yeah, let's imagine when we only have 2 matzahs like Rambam. Let's just assume that before we get to.
One of these.
No, this is good. It's good. I'll show you. This is my whole matzah, and this is my half matzah. Yeah. So if I have it like this, again, we're Rambam. Let's say right now. So we don't even have 3 matzahs. We only have 1.5. Yeah. So let's just say I did that, right? So if I went like this, my first bracha is hamaitzi. Which matzah is my bracha hamaitzi going on?
The
first
bottom
one on the top.
Sorry,
bottom.
it's going on the bottom one because I have to
No,
make
you're
hamaitzi on the
passing
top one,
over.
which means I just passed over a half matzah to get to a mitzvah down here. We don't want to do that. So therefore I go like this, and therefore my hamaitzi is going here, and then my bracha on matzah goes on everything else.
Also, you're
So I'm going in
concealing
order. So my brachas are going in order of how I'm holding it, which is
So-
hamaitzi, then brachas on bracha on the mitzvah matzah. Hamaitzi whole matzah, bracha on matzah on the broken one.
Now, a technical question.
Yeah.
If they're in those sleeves, like the Colonel Lady throw packaging, then and it said you're supposed to break the middle or break the middle one.
Yeah.
Then when you make a motzi, you put your hands into the thing and then hold it like so, or you withdraw.
No, the Rebbe would hold them all under the. We'll see in the Rebbe's Haggadah.
No.
We hold them all under while they're still in the
Back.
bag, but like with our fingers between all of them, so that we're like actually holding all of them,
Right.
all 3 for the bracha
Oh, wow.
hamaitzi. The bracha hamaitzi, you're holding all 3 because you want to hold lechem mishnah for hamaitzi. Then let's go. So okay, what I described before was Rambam, but if we were doing Rashbam, would be the same thing, but just when you're making the first hamaitzi, you're holding 3 matzahs, not 2,
But
2.5 rather than 1.5. Yeah, the same rationale. I'm not having the broken matzah on top, so your hamaitzi doesn't skip over a matzah to get to the whole one under it. Follow that? Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
I remember learning that thing. It was a thing that there shouldn't be like seats or like what do they call? Like a.
Okay, Pesach is different a little bit. It's Shabbos, you're right.
Seder.
Okay, halacha hey. But you're correct about Shabbos. Lacher shegamar brachas hamaitzi. After you finish making the bracha hamaitzi, yesh lahashmit hashlishis hashleim min yodai. You should then drop the 3rd matzah on the bottom from your hand. The yoiches beprusa melamata, ubel yoina melamayla. Now you're holding the broken matzah below and the whole matzah on top. V'yivarach ala chilas matzah, and you're making the bracha on the mitzvah of eating matzah. So you're dropping the bottom matzah for that. Even though, we'll see this in the Rebbe's Haggadah, and they put it in a footnote here, 18, but we'll see in the Rebbe's Haggadah. The Alter doesn't explain why you should drop the third matzah. Why should you drop the third matzah when you make the bracha matzah?
You're eating it anyway.
You're eating it for a sandwich in a minute.
Third one?
Yeah.
The third one, the bottom one's for the other one.
This the second half of the broken one, right? The big half of the broken one which you broke earlier goes after Kodesh. Right? Right? The broken half, the second half of the broken one goes for Afikoyman.
So you can see the broken.
So the Rebbe offers a few explanations that we'll see in the Rebbe's Haggadah.
Broken one's in the middle.
The broken one's in the middle. So even though the halacha is, the custom is at least as we'll learn, and we learned about this in the Kairach files, that when you make the bracha motzi, you actually have in mind the third matzah, which you're going to be using for Kairach anyway. But we drop it when we do that. We'll get to that in the Rebbe's Haggadah. Okay. You happy with me so far? So you're holding all three matzahs, or 2.5 for the hamotzi, because you have to hold the lecha mishnah. The top one's got to be the whole one, because when you make a bracha hamotzi, you have to make it on the whole bracha, on a whole one, and then you drop the bottom one for the bracha on the mitzvah of matzah, because the bracha mitzvah matzah is primarily going in your broken one. Okay, that's your mitzvah matzah, which is supposed to be lechamoni, poor man's bread. Yeah, so far.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
You're not supposed to score. You can't score the matzah.
Yeah, let's go to matzah. No.
Right.
Aval bat lo yashmit mi yadai matzah hashlema yoina koidem birchas alachilas matzah. If the bracha thanking Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah, and the mitzvah of eating matzah is going to be primarily on the broken one, so why not drop the whole top one also and just hold the middle one? Right? Why only the bottom one are you dropping? Why not drop the top one too? Follow the question. It explains. Yeah. And moreover, needless to say, don't break off any piece of the whole matzah on top. Only after you've eaten, only after you made the full bracha alachilas matzah. Meaning, you want the bracha, the mitzvah of matzah, to be both on the broken one, for sure, that's your mitzvah matzah, as well as on the top whole one. Why? Because there is a view that the bracha of hamotzi. This is, I think, the Rambam's position. Or Rabbi. No, that's the Rambam. There's an opinion which says that when you make hamotzi, we just finished saying that the hamotzi is supposed to be made on the whole matzah. There's one opinion which says the hamotzi actually should go onto the broken matzah, because because the poor man's bread. In other words, this opinion says on the night of the Seder, poor man replaces rich man. So if all year long you're supposed to make hamotzi on rich man, tonight make hamotzi on poor man. That's this opinion. So the other opinion is poor man is exclusive for the mitzvah of eating matzah. Hamotzi is left to go on a whole one. So the hamotzi goes on top one, and therefore you have the whole one on top. The other opinion says no. Poor man's bread replaces everything. So even your hamotzi goes in the broken matzah. Follow? That's this opinion. Therefore, we want to cover both bases. And therefore we have a broken and a whole one for both brachas. And therefore to begin with, make both of these brachas, the bracha on bread and the bracha on the mitzvah, on both the whole and the broken. Then you take a kazayas of matzah from the top one, because that's your bracha hamotzi, right? And then a kazayas from the broken one, because that's your mitzvah of eating matzah. This is the basic reason, by the way, why we have two kazayasim. You follow that?
One for the mitzvah of matzah.
Well, because you make two brachas, hamotzi and alachilas matzah. Each of those brachas went on a different piece of bread. One went on the whole matzah and one went on the half matzah. So you had to eat both. So which means when you break your middle matzah, make sure that you're supposed to make a bigger portion for afikoyman and a smaller portion leave in your bag. And make sure that the smaller piece you leave in your bag has enough to be a kazayas. Because that's the mitzvah of eating matzah is going to be primarily filled with that broken piece left behind in your Seder plate. And then you're going to add an additional kazayas from the top matzah because you made two brachas.
So,
Follow that?
Yeah, but so the
Sorry.
So,
Yeah.
So the order in which you eat these matzah, you first have to eat the one for hamotzi, and then
We actually bite into both at once, simultaneously.
I made two brachas. Aren't you doing one in vain?
One is to thank you Hashem for eating bread, and one is thank you Hashem for the mitzvah. Like Kiddush, thank you Hashem for the cup of wine, thank you Hashem for Shabbos. Yeah.
So if done correctly, healthy, thing is halach, etc., should your bag be empty by the time the seder is done?
It doesn't have to be,
Okay.
but it likely is. You'll have a little bit left of your top. You in theory, you can have half of your top matzah left over.
Right.
You only took a kazayas from that one,
Right.
and then most, or at least a third of your bottom matzah because you only took 2 kazesim for your sandwich. So you could in theory leave behind some matzah. Not a lot. You end up eating almost 3 full matzahs. Almost. If you're gluten free and you struggle, which other people are,
Right.
then see me, consult with me. I'll tell you what to do and how to minimize their intake of matzah and what like your basic mitzvah are and how you should do that.
You could do like the oat matzahs or something.
That's very, very, very expensive.
Yeah.
It'd
But
be
you,
like,
you just get
we're
it
talking about
for the
$40
seder.
for like 1 matzah
Wow.
or more. Yeah, it's very, very, very expensive. But people do that, then they eat minimally. They eat the 1 kazayas. That's it.
Right.
Anyway, tell you how to do that. Okay, continuing. Even though, as far as the bracha hamoitzi goes, you don't, in the first instance, need to eat a full kazayas, right? If you were having a nibble of bread, what bracha would you make?
Nibble of bread?
Nibble.
Oh,
Still hamoitzi.
Right.
The question of
Just
kazayas
like-
is only for the after bracha, right?
Right.
So therefore, as far as the letter of the law goes, I don't need to take a kazayas from the full top because hamoitzi doesn't require a full kazayas, right?
You still have to wash.
I need a kazayas for the bottom one because that's my mitzvah of matzah. But for the top one, seemingly I don't need the whole kazayas for the top matzah, which is the bracha of hamoitzi. Following that? Yeah. Ela filu kol shehu. Even the tiniest amount of matzah, yachol avarach hamoitzi, you're allowed to make hamoitzi. So in theory, maybe then I should have a kazayas for my broken one for the mitzvah of eating matzah, and just a nibble from the top one because of the hamoitzi. The kol makam nonetheless, given shebishvil berches achilas matzah, tzarich l'soya kazayas, but because the mitzvah of matzah requires a kazayas, shal pachas ein yachol avarach, because less than a kazayas of matzah, you cannot make a bracha thanking Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah if you're going to eat less than a kazayas. Why? Because you cannot fulfill your obligation of eating matzah with less than a kazayas. And if you have to have a kazayas in order to fulfill your mitzvah of matzah, and therefore you need a kazayas for the bracha of matzah. Right? If so, therefore, according to the opinions which say that the mitzvah of eating matzah is not fulfilled by the broken matzah, but actually fulfilled by the top matzah, or at least the bracha of matzah is on top matzah. Kazayas. You have to have a kazayas from the top matzah if that's the one you're fulfilling a mitzvah with. But the original opinion, which is a primary opinion, that the bracha of eating matzah, which is the mitzvah of eating matzah, is on the broken one. You have to have a kazayas from the broken matzah. Therefore, to fulfill both, to cover both grounds, we take a kazayas from each one. All that, everything's a dispute, basically.
Exactly.
You have two. In other words, because we're dancing between 2 obligations here. We have one obligation, which is that when you eat your matzah, when you eat bread of your Yom Tif meal, or any time, certainly Yom Tif, it's got to be a whole loaf. In fact, it should be 2 whole loaves. And when you eat from your whole loaf, you have to eat a kazayas. Obligation 1, which is true for Seder night also. Obligation 2 is you have to have poor man's bread, which means broken. How do I do both? Well, do both. Because the way you understand it can change. Because you can understand and say, well, if the Torah said to have a broken one, then forget the usual whole loaf. Or you can say, no, it's in addition to the whole loaf. And then you can say, well, the whole loaf actually is also for your mitzvah of matzah. But you have a broken bread just to remember poor man's bread, but really you're doing the mitzvah of matzah from the whole. So because you can read it every way, we do it every which way, which is to have the whole, the half, and a kazayas from each.
So
Yeah.
eating them together is also to combine both disputes as to which bracha should have been done first.
That's correct, and that's the very next words.
Oh.
Halacha vav.
And even if you
Baruch shekivanta, meaning blessed is the one that you got it right. It's literally the next words. You have to eat them all together because you don't know which one's first, and you cannot eat bread that's not of your mitzvah before you ate the mitzvah. So you have to be eating the mitzvah bread right away, which was the mitzvah bread both. So you got to eat both. Anyway, yeah.
No, it's and even if it's just for nibble, you still have to wash before saying.
Yeah, always.
Always.
But over here, we're saying not to do a nibble on your mitzi bread, which is your top one, but to have a full kazayas, because there is an opinion which says the top one is the mitzvah, and if we have to kazayas from that one anyway. Yeah. Yeah, are you with me?
Yeah.
We have a few more minutes.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a few minutes. Because we started a little late. If you have a few minutes, or okay? Okay, let's go. Yeah.
Zoom call at 9 o'clock, but I started the car.
Okay, thank you. These two kazaysim that are taken from the top matzah from the broken one, you got to eat them together. This is to say, to Yeshua's point, to put both of the kazaysim into your mouth at once. There's all these little details people don't, that we don't know, because you just, again, all right. I'm not gonna, what's the word? I'm not gonna overdo the point. Because if you're going to first eat the kazayas of your moitzi, meaning your top one, that is to say the whole top one, and only afterwards, you're going to eat the kazayas of your matzah mitzvah, your mitzvah matzah, which is the broken one. If you eat the kazayas from the top one, and then the kazayas from the bottom one, then you will have made an interruption between your bracha on the mitzvah matzah and your actual fulfillment of the mitzvah matzah. Because the fulfillment of the mitzvah matzah is on the bottom one. But you, in the meantime, ate a whole top one, a whole kazayis from the top one. Right? Same thing in the reverse. Now, for sure, if you're of the opinion that the bracha on moitzi goes to the broken matzah, if you're going to first eat a kazayis from the bottom one, the broken one, and then a kazayis from the top one, then you're making a break between your bracha hamoitzi, which goes in the top one, by eating the middle one first.
That's also the Passover, right?
Eat whichever one you do first, you're passing over one of the mitzvahs. If you eat the bottom one first, which is your mitzvah matzah, you're making a break between your hamoitzi and your top one. If you're eating the top one first, then you're making a break between your bracha of the mitzvah matzah, you're eating the mitzvah matzah, which is the bottom one. Therefore, put them both into your mouth at the same time. Clear?
Yes.
Because hamoitzi is the top one. There's different opinions that say which all go the other way, that all of them go on all of them, or different combinations of the opinions. But the primary opinion is that the hamoitzi goes in the top one, whole, and the mitzvah alachilas matzah, the thank you Hashem for the mitzvah matzah, goes in the bottom one. And therefore, you cannot make a bracha between either of the brachas and the eating of either of these matzahs, and therefore eat them both at once. Is that clear? Say again? That's it. But you don't need to swallow them at once. You have to put them into your mouth at once. But you don't need to swallow them at once. You just put them into your mouth and you chew them there. And actually, what you should do in theory is swallow a whole kazayis at once. And then you swallow a whole kazayis afterwards, meaning you're going to keep swallowing one kazayis for each swallow. I don't know how many people actually end up doing this. And this is mamash, you have to like sit there. Anyway, we're going to get into the
Do like a half and half.
you put the whole thing in, you chew it up, and then you divide it into two in your mouth, and you swallow one at a time. Kazayis.
Too much to swallow.
It's very difficult to do this particular halacha. We'll look at a footnote 23. Gemara willing tomorrow gives a little more detail on this. Good, wonderful day, everybody.
Get the
Good luck.
Get some rest, Rabbi.